Good morning. This is our webinar on our Lochs and Castles of Scotland program happening exactly a year from now. In fact, a year today. Today is September the 19th, and we're starting next year on September the 19th, which is why we decided to have a webinar 1 year in advance, because this is a popular, Scotland is still very high on people's lists to visit. This trip in particular, this cruise is quite unique, and we booked it actually quite a while ago because it's very hard to get space on it. Let me say a few words, first of all, about Wheel and Anchor. For those of you who are new to us, we are a Canadian-based community. Not only based, but our members are almost exclusively from Canada. We have a handful of folks from other countries, but we are almost exclusively Canadian. And we share a like-minded view of how to travel, and that's kind of the beauty of our groups, is that everybody sort of really has sort of a polite way of going around, if I can put it that way. And not just polite, but also, a desire to learn, a desire to ask intelligent questions and find out a little bit more, experience local people, local culture, customs, and so on. And it's this vibe that it really resonates among our travelers. We have like a 90% rate of repeat travelers. They come on one trip and they come again for another, because we also have a lot of fun. We can let our guard down a bit. It's a little bit different than sometimes if you're traveling folks from other countries, and that have a bit of a different viewpoint on life and on how we behave when we're visitors in other countries. And it's this that it really sort of bonds us together. And of course, while on tour, it's all about becoming connected to your fellow members. We put a lot of pride in this. A lot of our members get together outside of our trips themselves. We had a whole bunch of members that was on one of our trips to Egypt not that long ago, that organized a reunion, and people actually flew in from all different parts of the country, and friendships are formed, and really that's what makes the experience of travel so different than just joining sort of any old organized group. So this is what Wheel and Anchor is all about. So let me introduce the team. So my name is Gordon Drager. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor and the person who curates pretty much all of our itineraries that you see have been, hand sort of picked and organized by myself. But of course, my ever-growing team of people. In particular, today I want to mention Barb, who is one of our trip specialists and is always there to help answer any questions that you have about joining any of our programs, and of course Paula as well. So many of you, if you've booked with us before, if you've joined one of our trips, you'll have spoken with Barb and Paula. And not joining us today, though, is Jean from Scotland, but she's one of two guides that we have that are for this trip, because we are chartering the whole vessel, and so we split the group into two. So we have nice, friendly, manageable groups as we do all of our sightseeing right from the beginning in Edinburgh all the way through the cruise to the Highland program at the end. So today I'm going to take you together with some great scenery, some great shots that my colleague Joel has picked out for this webinar, to show you a little bit about what you can expect to see around Scotland, and what our program is going to look like in September of 2024. So first of all, of course, and here's a great shot of one of the railway overpasses, one of the viaducts on the West Highland line, which forms part of our extension program to the Isle of Skye. I'll talk about that in a minute. Our trip begins in Edinburgh, which of course is one of the main cities in Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow. So we begin here, easy place to fly into from Canada, from a number of cities, certainly from Toronto, other cities you can fly direct into Edinburgh. Otherwise you can connect in, and as I say, we'll spend the first few days here. We'll travel then overland, up via Dunkeld, up through the Highlands to Inverness, where we'll spend a night before embarking on our ship that will take us all the way down through all these four lochs, through this man-made so-called Caledonian Canal. And I'll share with you about that as I get into the day-by-day itinerary. Our ship is then going to continue out here into the Atlantic Ocean, passing these lovely towns, Craignewer, Tobermory, and then up to the Inner Hebrides Islands, where we will end up at the Kyle of Lochs, which is on the mainland just opposite the Isle of Skye. For those who are doing just the main program, they'll travel by rail again back via Inverness, actually heading back to Edinburgh with one final night there before flying home. For those that are continuing on the extension, we've added a couple of extra days in the Isle of Skye. We'll get to see the Trottenerge Peninsula up here, which has some of the most amazing mountain scenery, not just in the UK, but anywhere in the world. And we'll ride the West Highland line, which is a rail line that goes one of the most scenic in the world, all the way down the west coast of Scotland, culminating in Glasgow, where we'll also spend a couple of days and enjoy this amazing city that is often overlooked by travelers. So I'm going to give you a few of the highlights of this trip. Of course, all of the details are within that program itinerary, that if you haven't already gotten it, you can download it off of our website, or you can call in to Paul and Barb, and they can sort of furnish you with some of the details. So let me start off, of course, with Edinburgh, Old Reekie, Old Smoky, as they call it. Of course, the capital of Scotland, and an incredibly majestic city. I've been blessed to have visited here a few times. I have friends that live in Edinburgh. It is really a magical, magical place. It sits on 7 hills that are originally, volcanic formations, the most famous of which, of course, Castle Rock, upon which sits Edinburgh Castle, that amazing feat of architecture that dates back to the 12th century, that is the highlight and the most visited, I think, site in all of Scotland. It sits at the end of the Royal Mile, and is, as I say, proudly sort of overlooks the whole city. Edinburgh is divided sort of into 2 parts, into an old part and into a new part. We're going to explore a little bit of both on this trip. The new town is really quite known for its very well preserved Georgian architecture. It's a very walkable city. So we're going to do most of our touring around on foot. As I say, we are going to head up to Edinburgh Castle. You can't not visit Edinburgh Castle when you're here. And as I say, it dates back to the 1200s, the oldest part being St. Margaret's Chapel, which forms a part of it. And it still has a function in society, mostly today as the seat of the British Army, or one of the seats of the British Army, still have their bases here. And of course, is where a lot of the sort of formal occasions, formal celebrations take place. Edinburgh Castle is connected into the city by what's called the Royal Mile, which is a street that is, of course, 1 mile long. At the other end of this street, of course, Holyrood Palace, which is the residence of now King Charles, as we know. When he's in Scotland, he visits Holyrood, and this is the route between the palace and the castle. There's a lot of other unexpected things to see about Edinburgh. I mean, it's a university town, so it has got a very youthful flair to it. There's a lot of cafes, a lot of places to taste whiskey. Of course, we'll have different opportunities up in the Highlands as well, to have a little bit of the beverage that Scotland is so famous for. And so even though we'll have sort of a good 3 days here, it may be the type of thing that you want to fly in a day early. I know a lot of our members like to come have a pre-night so they can fully enjoy the city and everything that you can expect to see. We'll of course visit as well the environs around Edinburgh. Here in the background, you see the Firth of Forth, which is of course this body of water that is just outside of Edinburgh. We'll visit the lovely little town of Culross, which sits on the edge of the Firth. and it's a 16th century village that has been super well preserved. If you are a TV watcher and you've seen the series Outlander, you'll probably recognize scenes from this town because it was all filmed in and around Culross. We'll also head out to Stirling, which is sort of to the northwest of Edinburgh, sort of between Edinburgh and Glasgow. This is another lovely town that is got its centerpiece is Stirling Castle. So not only will we get to see Edinburgh, but we'll see some of these other towns that are in this area of between Edinburgh and Glasgow, like Stirling, like Culross. So we'll have a great time and basing ourselves in Edinburgh. So we're always back in the evening to be able to take in the city by walking around in the evening. We'll head then overland by our mini coaches up towards Inverness. We're going to pass by Dunkeld, which is nestled in the hills. This little village is kind of the gateway to the Highlands. So all of a sudden we go from fairly flat territory in and around Edinburgh, and then up in these incredible mountains that we're going to see really for the rest of the trip. Will start to open up in front of us, and we'll have lunch at a town of Pitlochry, which is sort of further up the road towards Inverness. I remember I have a memory of Pitlochry as a backpacker way back when, stopping in this town and admiring the incredible scenery that they have around this lake with all the high mountains rising up around it. It's really incredible. We'll also have a sheepdog demonstration on the way before we hit Inverness, because of course, herding sheep is such an important part of Scotland's agriculture, and they still use dogs, very highly trained dogs. You'll be amazed at what these dogs are capable of doing, how well they're trained and how well they can master their flock. So that'll be part of a day that takes us up into Inverness. We'll arrive into this town itself. And, I remember Inverness when I first visited, which is, coming up 30 years ago. It was kind of a bit of an outpost, a small town that, didn't have a lot to offer. I mean, it's obviously got the castles like Inverness Castle that you see here, but it is actually one of the fastest growing cities in the whole UK. So much has transpired here over the decades that, even if you maybe visited Scotland a long time ago, as I had, you'll find the city has totally transformed itself. It, of course, sits on the River Ness, which is the outflow of Loch Ness that flows out to the North Sea. So it's really a charming little town. We'll have our guides take us around, show us around. Actually, Inverness Castle, it's pictured here, is under a multi-year renovation. So unfortunately, we can't get into the castle itself, but there is a terrific museum that is directly adjacent that will give us a bit of an insight and understanding of what life in this sort of capital of the Highlands has been all about. Inverness is the starting point of our cruise, and it's here that we'll embark on our privately chartered ship, the Lord of the Highlands. And again, I'm super excited and proud that we've been able to secure this ship for our program. The Lord of the Highlands is really only one of two passenger vessels that can sail the Caledonian Canal. In fact, they are made just to sail the canal. They barely fit into the locks, which makes every passage quite a spectacle for the locals who come out to the locks to be able to watch the ship go through, as the captain skillfully navigates the boat into these very, very narrow locks with barely inches to spare on either side. It's quite amazing. And the vessel itself is really five-star luxurious. You can see the finishings inside, beautifully done, Scottish inspired, but at the same time without having tartan everywhere. So it's not over Scotland. I think it's very elegant inside. The staff are absolutely wonderful, super friendly, because we have it all to ourselves. We're going to get sort of extra special treatment, and we'll have a system where we sort of mix around tables, and it gives us a chance to sort of get to know everybody else on the trip. Again, a beauty of our wheel and anchor trips is the social aspect, if you will. And as I say, some fine chaps with a great Scottish wit that were there to serve up drinks, which are, of course, included wine and various other beverages are part of the program. The food is really, really excellent. We'll have a smattering of Scottish cuisine, so you'll try things like haggis if you haven't tried it before, even though when you hear the description of what it is, you might sort of shy away. But my own experience is it actually tastes better than what it sounds like. The ship has 16 cabins that are available to us that come in different categories. We have our standard deluxe, we have our balcony cabins, as you see pictured here, and we have one deluxe suite, which, looking at the list, is still available for those that want to have an extra special voyage. There is the one suite and a handful of balcony cabins remaining, and then the rest are all wonderfully appointed, very comfortable, a very cozy way to travel around the Scottish Highlands. So talking about the Caledonian Canal itself, as I say, we will head out of Inverness and head immediately into Loch Ness, which is where we'll spend the next 7 nights cruising down this canal, 100 kilometers from east to west, where it pours out, it doesn't really pour out, but where it ends up in basically the Atlantic Ocean. During that time, we're going to pass through 29 lochs that connect these 29 lochs that connect the 4 lochs. And of course, a loch, as you probably know, is lake in Gaelic, and the most famous of which being Loch Ness. I'm sure you will have heard of Loch Ness before. It was made famous probably most notably because of Nessie, the so-called fictitious, well, it's arguable whether it's fictitious. There's a lot of locals that still believe that Nessie is somewhere lurking beneath the waters, because, you know, the loch is fairly long. It's about 37 kilometers in length, and at its maximum, it's a whole 800 feet deep. And it's because of these very murky depths that some people still believe that the Loch Ness monster still exists. But along the way, as we pass down Loch Ness and into the other lochs, we'll see, you know, beautiful forested hills. At this time of the year, we'll probably even see some colors starting to change, and we'll pass some amazing castles, like, for example, Urquhart Castle, that is on the side of Loch Ness. You probably have heard it before, which was Urquhart Castle was the home to the MacLeods, if I'm not mistaken. I always get confused the different castles and who they belong to. But castles, of course, the name of the program is Castles and Lochs. So we're going to see really a great number of castles, some beautiful scenery as we go from loch to loch. We're going to stop in at a little town called Fort Augustus, which is literally cut in half by the canal. And as I say, because of this spectacle of these ships passing tightly through the canal, for the first couple of days, we're going to see lots of well-wishers out, you know, hoping that the captain carefully steers us into each of these lochs. So we will make our way over 2 days, all the way down the length of the Caledonian Canal. You're not going to want to miss 1 minute of being on deck and witnessing as we go through this canal, passing all the canals. The scenery is just magical. Again, the staff on board will be off every day, typically mornings and afternoons, to do various tours around, to visit a couple of these castles along the way, to visit some of the villagers, to get out a chance, stretch your legs, and really take in some of this amazing countryside. Along the way as well, I should point out that for those of you who opt not to go on the extension program, we are going to have a short little excursion along the West Highland Railway on a particularly scenic part of the railway. So you'll get to experience that too, even if you decide not to join us for the extension program to the Isle of Skye. The Caledonian Canal, at its westernmost terminus, as I say, comes into the Atlantic Ocean. And one of our first stops here is in Oban. And if you're a whiskey drinker, you will no doubt know, you'll have heard of Oban before because of the famous distillery there, which in fact is older than the town. It dates back to the end of the 18th century, and the town sort of came together after that. But here's an aerial view out looking from Oban out to the Isle of Mull that you see in the background. It's a sheltered bay. A lot of the next couple of days is in fairly sheltered waters, so we don't generally have a problem with there being a lot of movement on the ship. I know this is a question that we get on some of these cruises, but there are a couple of there's some hours on a couple of the days, as I say, on the next day when we get out to the Isle of Eigg, when you are a little bit exposed to the Atlantic Ocean, so you could get a little bit of motion, but generally speaking, in September, the weather's pretty decent. There's not generally any really windy or heavy seas, and the captain's obviously trying to steer us around and avoid from any of that by sticking close to the islands. As I say, we'll spend part of the day in Oban. We'll actually overnight at Craignure, and from here at Craignure, we're going to be heading along the island of Mull, which is a massive island, one of the largest next to Skye in the Inner Hebrides, yet with only a population of about 2,500 people. So here is where we really experience the barrenness of the Scottish Highlands. We'll pass places like Urquhart Castle, which of course was the home of the MacLean clan. A lot of the castles in Scotland, as you know, are attributed to or were occupied by the various clans, the MacLeans, the MacLeods, the MacDonalds, and so on and so on and so forth. And so if you are of Scottish heritage and you don't already know where your castle is, you might want to look that up, because it may very well be one of the castles that we pass or visit on this itinerary. If the weather is good and the conditions allow us to anchor here, we will actually make a visit into this beautifully perched castle, as you can see here at the end of the island, overlooking Mull. At this point, we will continue out, and as I say, we're exposed a little bit to the seas here as we pass actually 3 islands, Muck, Eigg, and Rum, and particularly Eigg here is a place where we'll stop, we'll get out, and we'll visit some of these very sort of far out communities, meaning far from sort of civilization as we know it, if we were. And what I find fascinating beyond the incredible landscapes is, the lifestyle of the people, what they get up to, how they live their lives in this, pretty remote and quite harsh part of the world. The weather here is very often, as they say in Gaelic, dreich, which means sort of miserable and wet. And we can't certainly promise you're going to have a week of sunny skies. You never know in Scotland. But what I find from my own visits there is that, the weather, whether it's that, misty, dreich kind of weather, or whether it happens to be a sunny day, you get a good feel for what life is like there, and a good feel for the environment and so on. So of course we hope for some sun. You never know what we're going to get. And we're going to sail then from Eigg across the so-called Sound of Sleat. So we hope that we don't have any sleet as we make that crossing, and we'll end up at Armadale, which is actually on the Isle of Skye. And from here, we'll then spend one more day of sailing to the Isle of Lochs, which his most famous attraction is the Eilean Castle that you see pictured here. Certainly one of the most famous ones in Scotland. As the Scots will say, there's a picture of it like on every cookie tin in the country, but beautiful location here out on the bay. And this is a castle that has been restored, so we're able to visit it. This is a home of the McRaes, and is perhaps best known because it was recently featured in one of the last James Bond films. So we'll spend some time here in the Isle of Lochs. We'll have our final dinner on board, and I think at that point you'll have had such an incredible experience of Scotland. You'll have seen so much of the Highlands, and without having to pack and unpack it. It really what makes sailing this way, particularly on a privately chartered vessel, such a great experience. I'm sure it's going to be great. So the following day at Isle of Lochs, will be the end day of our main program. So those who are heading back to Edinburgh will travel by train. So it's actually quite a nice train trip because it will retrace a lot of our steps along the Caledonian Canal back to Inverness and then heading down, ending up in Edinburgh, where we put you up for a final night, so that you can then fly home the next day and get a little bit more of Edinburgh before you fly back. The Scottish Highlands, of course, are really the main highlight of our program. And so for those who are interested in seeing a bit more of Scotland, I highly, highly recommend staying on for the next few days and visiting Skye. The Isle of Skye, if you haven't heard of it already, is probably doesn't need much introduction. It is the largest island in the Inner Hebrides. I put the map in here as well, just again to remind us of where we're at. So we sail down here through the canal up to Oban and then Craigniu Tobermory out here. This is the part where we are a little bit exposed to the North Atlantic before being in protected waters again to Armadale and the Isle of Lochs. So from here, our extension program is going to take us up to Portree, which is the principal city. It's not a city; it's a town of about 2,500 people, but it is the main settlement on the Isle of Skye. And from where we will be able to sort of take in some of the amazing scenery that you have here. You know, what's interesting about Skye is that the island was actually populated by well over 20,000 people way back in the middle of the 19th century, partly because of the kelp that was harvested here, also peat. They had a lot of industry that brought people here to this remote part of Scotland. But over the course of 100 years, until the mid-1970s, the population declined to barely 7,000 people on the entire island. It's since recovered. And so it's interesting to understand and learn, and this is part of what we'll see as we visit Portree, what it was that drove people away and what's been bringing them back over the last 20 years or so, because Skye, while still very sparsely populated by European standards, is sort of coming back to life. On Skye, we'll visit the Trotternish Peninsula, which is arguably has some of the most incredible mountain scenery in the world. Not just because of the mountains, but because, of course, you're surrounded by the North Atlantic. And some of the formations here, like the Old Man of Storr that you see pictured, is what we're going to take in. We're going to head over to Dunvegan Castle as well, which is part of the MacLeod clan. And as I say, really go a little bit more intensely and visit Skye, which is otherwise a pretty remote place to have to get to if you wanted to go on your own and, you know, rent a car, and, you know, it takes a few days of drive and a ferry to get all the way up there. So, you know, while we're in the area, why not visit this most celebrated and extremely scenic part of Scotland? From Skye, then we will transfer back to Mallaig. So we're going to drive down to the south end of the island on our coach, take a ferry across to Mallaig, which is again on the mainland, as if it were, if you call the UK a mainland. And here we're going to embark on the West Highland Railway. And I don't know, I'm a big rail buff myself. The West Highland, if you look up most scenic rail journeys in the world, the Scottish West Highland Line is certainly on that list. And so while we won't be going by steam train, this is the only photo that we could find, actually, it will be a regular locomotive. The steam train only goes on special occasions, but we're going to pass through this beautiful countryside as we head south towards Glasgow. We'll go over all these different viaducts that were built in the early 1900s by McAlpine. He was famous at the time because many of these bridges were the first ever that were built in concrete. So up to that point, most railway trestles were done out of wood, of course. And so what makes that West Highland Line is just a little anecdote that makes them special is the fact that it was the first sort of set of concrete bridges and aqueducts. And as I say, a day that will be not forgotten, and a great cap off to our journey all around Scotland. We'll then head back into Glasgow for the last couple nights. And, you know, Glasgow has traditionally gotten a bit of a bad rap. because it was, up until sort of 25 years ago, a very industrial city. Coal, steel. It was a very sort of a blue collar environment, and which made it less appealing, I think, to sort of international tourists. But they have changed their game incredibly over the last 25 years. And it's now really a lively, bustling town. And I think in many regards rivals Edinburgh. I mean, of course, Edinburgh's landscape with the Seven Hills gives it a unique quality, whereas Glasgow is pretty much mostly flat. But they've done an incredible job restoring all of the Georgian buildings. I mean, of course, Glasgow back in the day was the second most important city in the British Empire, after London, of course. And so there is a tremendous history here, and it's drawn people back to Glasgow. A lot of Scots that had emigrated to other parts of the UK, and you've got 3 huge pedestrian streets. You've got amazing museums and galleries. We're going to get a tour around some of the highlights of the town. You've got great live music, and Glasgow has sort of become known as having some of the most friendly people that you'll find in the whole world, as I think some magazines have commented on. And I think in general, folks in Scotland are super, super friendly. They have great wit and humor. Sometimes you have to listen once or twice extra carefully to what people are saying because of the dialect. In fact, up in Skye, still better than 50% of the population still claim Gaelic as their first language. So we'll get to experience a little bit of that as well. And then from here, it'll be a departure back to Canada. And again, good connections to get from Glasgow back to most places in Canada. So that gives quite a sort of a quick and dirty, if you will, overview of Scotland. Again, I think this is one of our more unique programs, in that we have this privately chartered vessel. I'm very proud to be offering it, and excited to have a whole host of members that are going to be joining us next year. Of course, all of these details are available in our program itinerary, but just to give you a heads up, we have pricing here, of course, everything in Canadian dollars for our various cabin categories: deluxe, balcony, and suite. And we have a certain number of cabins available for those who wish to have their own. And then for the extension program, we have a separate price here, again in Canadian dollars, for double and single. On this program, as with most of our programs, it's very inclusive. We have terrific local guides. As I mentioned, we're going to be splitting this into 2 groups, which is a bit unusual for the ship. They normally tour around with the whole boat, but for me, that's a bit too many people. So that's why we've got 2 blue badge guides, who are really, really excellent and a lot of fun and very, very knowledgeable. They're going to be taking us around. On board the ship, we've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that is accompanied by wine and spirits and beer. So all your beverages are included as well. So really is quite a good value program in that sense. And during our stay in our pre-stay in Edinburgh, we have obviously a hotel with breakfast, and then we've got, of course, our welcome dinner and some other meals included in there as well. So fully hosted, as with all of our programs, for the first part of the trip. And depending on how many sign up for the extension program, we'll have that hosted as well. So the only thing that you have to worry about extra, other than sort of some pocket money or for an extra little meal, a snack here and there, of course, is your airfare and your insurance, both of which we are more than happy to quote you on to give you a sense of what you're looking at next year. I mean, it's still, we're still a little bit too far out to start booking flights, but you're looking at around $1,100-$1,200 to fly in and out of Toronto, Montreal, a bit more, of course, from the west coast of Canada. So now I think, Barb, we will take any questions. And I just realized I didn't mention the weather, so I'm going to preempt the weather question by addressing that for those that are curious. What's the weather like in Scotland? And of course, as any Scot will tell you, you never know. But typically in September, it's a good month to go. You're generally talking about weather in the sort of mid to high teens during the day. It can cool off to the low teens in night. And it can rain anytime in Scotland. You have that famous Scotch mist that can sort of descend, but it often blows out just as quickly as it blows in. But it's a comfortable time. I think that September is really optimal because it's also a little bit less busy than the summer months when you tend to get the peak tourist traffic and everything is sort of packed and jammed. Barb, do we have any other questions that have come in?
Yeah, how many cabins is on the vessel, and like what sort of group size are we
Yeah,
talking?
so there are 16 cabins available for our members. We have a cabin for our host, of course, and for the guides. So the maximum group size that we're going to get is about 32 people. Depending on how many singles. So we usually get a couple of solo travelers that join us. So we'll probably be in and around 30 people. And as I say, we are splitting the group into two so that when we go out on shore excursions, you're going to have a group of around 15, 16 people.
Okay, great. And how long is the train ride when you're coming back to Edinburgh?
It is pretty much so if you're disembarking after the main program at Kyle of Lochs and going back, the overall train ride is about 5 hours in duration, with a quick connection in Inverness. So yeah, it's a good half a day, but it's quite a scenic and a beautiful train ride.
Okay, excellent. And one other question is just if people have dietary needs in terms of meals, because most of the meals are
Yep.
on board.
Absolutely. And, the ship has let us know that they can accommodate pretty much anything as far as, those who are, vegetarian or gluten-free or have specific allergies. They're quite used to that. The only caveat we make is for anybody who is extremely sensitive to certain things. For example, for those that have celiac disease, where you absolutely cannot have any cross contamination. Those kinds of very special circumstances, we have to sort of address on an individual basis because there are limitations in terms of what kitchens are actually able to do. But generally speaking, most dietary restrictions can be taken into account without any problem.
Okay, perfect. I think that's it that has come in so far, but certainly if people have questions, they can call or email in to us, and we're happy to answer any questions that might come in.
Absolutely. So Paula, Barb are always there for questions. We welcome your questions. We'd love to have you come along on this trip. As I say, it is a very special one. We've already had quite a number of people sign up so far. But yeah, we're still a year out. And so there's still time to get on board if you're interested in touring Scotland with your fellow Wheel and Anchor members. We will have a blast. Coming up, our next webinar is tomorrow. Almost forgot, it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
So if you're interested at all in visiting Austria and South Tyrol, which will be hosted by me, this is my so-called book tour, because the book that I wrote, Heart of Hospitality, is really focused on these parts of Austria that a lot of people have never thought of visiting because they didn't know they were there. So if you're interested in Austria and South Tyrol, join us tomorrow, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Barb has posted the link to that in the chat box. So in case you missed it in our newsletter on the weekend, you can find that there. We'd love to join you for that and lots more webinars coming up. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Hope you'll come along with us to Scotland next September and have yourself a wonderful rest of the day. And Barb, thank you as well for your support.
Thank you. I was
Right.
just going to mention the Ireland one can be linked with this one if you want
Yes, thank you, Barb, for reminding me before I signed off. Of
to.
course, we have a trip as well to Ireland. In fact, we just that trip is just wrapping up our Ireland trip this year. We're doing the same trip next year, immediately following immediately following Scotland. So you can do both Scotland and continue right on to Dublin and then do a great trip around Ireland in case you want to do them all in one go. So thanks for mentioning that, Barb. Much appreciated. And I'll sign off once again. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye.